Why Pulse?
I'd like to introduce Dorrian Porter, who's the CEO of Moses. Our next discussion is actually going to be talking about mobile. Obviously, much like social networking, there's a lot of different ways that teenagers are using cell phones and their mobile devices to get music, and it's not just to listen to music as well. And they're also getting exposed to music in a lot of different ways. So wanted to have a one-on-one conversation with Dorrian to really get in depth on it. So please give a round of applause for Dorrian Porter, who's the CEO of Moses. So just really quickly, why don't you just kind of describe what Moses is and what it does as a company in the mobile world?
Sure. We're an interactive mobile marketing platform focused initially on the music industry and work with labels, artists, and independent artists on building out interactive mobile programs with their targeted audience. So really connecting bands and fans on the mobile device and kind of taking advantage, I guess, of a second wave of interest in mobile since they've been kind of toying with it since 2001, 2002, and really now trying to build programs that can establish these connections to the fans directly onto their mobile phones.
And how does a fan actually become aware of an artist through or connect to the artist through the mobile device? I mean, because there's so much clutter out there on a cell phone now with everything that you can do. How does one actually connect with the artist?
So there's two main ways, one of which we focus on. A big piece of what's happening in mobile music and mobile connection is through the carrier, through the handset. And that's a very important piece. It's important to artists. It's certainly important to the labels when you talk about mobile content sales, or certainly the push towards full track downloads. For us, we're much more focused on what we call interactive mobile marketing, which could sometimes be called kind of off deck, away from the kind of carrier portal. And in those cases, there's a variety of spots where fans are alerted to that kind of stuff. So it could be on the artist's website or their MySpace page. It could be as simple as building out a mobile mailing list, so being able to send text messages. And right now we're very focused on text messaging, because when you look at the data of usage across a young demographic, it really is heavily geared towards something that everybody can do and is doing on a daily basis, which is text messaging. It could be in venue. So, for example, at shows or concerts, we power a lot of interaction, whether it's a backstage pass contest with the mobile phone, being able to text a screen, and those types of activities. So for us, it's kind of discovering those connections and establishing those connections outside of a portal on the phone, although that still remains an important piece of the mobile equation for the industry.
Now, for teenagers, what tends to be most popular when they're interacting on a mobile device? Is it information? Is it actually going to be community? What actually is that tipping point for a kid to be interacting with an artist?
Yeah, I mean, I can say for us, what we're really focused on is that kind of informational text message interaction. So we might enable the ability to send out tour updates or album releases or things like that, where there's a clear demand on the part of young people to be the first to know, particularly for artists that they care about. And so they're readily willing and able to say, sign me up, tell me, so I can be first to know among my friends what's going on with that artist. And that, starting last year, became obvious to us. It's something we continue to invest in. It's something, as a company, we talk to labels and artists about investing in for themselves, because what we see is kind of a second wave, and right now it's kind of just for the carrier decks, with this kind of mobile content, which is obviously popular, being able to have ringtones or other types of content. The industry as a whole is really excited about full track downloads. Of course, the iPhone in some ways, bypasses that idea of full track downloads by including a more seamless syncing experience with your PC. But for us, it's really, very simple interactions, and including being able to message back to the artist. So being able to receive a message, just last week, Breaking Benjamin told its Moses subscribers that it was canceling its tour, and a lot of feedback back saying, sorry to hear that, we're sad, too bad, all that type of thing. So that two-way interaction, I think, is important, which leads to things like communities for the artists, et cetera. But right now, very focused on text messaging, and I was looking at some data just before I came here today around things like the fact that 65% of people aged 14 to 27 text message, and less than 20% of that same demographic has actually got a ringtone, and less than 1% has even side-loaded music to their phone or got a full track download.
So do you think the attention of both the music industry as well as the media on ringtones, full track downloads, is that kind of a red herring? Is that not really where the best way for music exposure through the mobile device is? Is it much more just going to be through simple, hey, here's my concert, or show up at the concert with this text message and you get $10 off a t-shirt?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what it's going to be is huge. I think it's a question of timing. So I think certainly a lot of us in this room, in terms of what we hear about or read about, it's always the sexy stuff. But I was at a conference where we had 10 University of Florida students helping us get the word about a relationship we had launched with Universal Motown Records Group. And I came up to them and I said, how's it going today? All 10 of them, University of Florida students, said, what's WAP? And I said, it's the mobile internet. Oh, yeah, we don't use that. And so I was, and I said, well, next time they ask you about that, tell them you don't use it, and that's why we don't support it with the artist, because that's the penetration rate. Is not just, stories, 10%, but it must be all the kids. It's not all the kids. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's data charges that exist. There's just kind of what you use the phone to do. Text messaging with your friends, which, by the way, cross-carrier has only been around in the US for 5 or so years, is still the dominant form of communication. But I'm a huge believer in the potential, and certainly, you don't see a launch like the iPhone that often in your lifetime, and something big is brewing, but then you can hear the same things that remain barriers, like the fact that the data plan is problematic or the data...
Well, I mean, and it's interesting, because for all the iPhone and the connection to the iTunes, the one thing that I hear, or I should say don't hear about, is the music capabilities. I mean, I really don't hear about people saying, all my friends who have actually gotten iPhones, they all talk about cool web browsing, email functionality. Nobody talks about it with music.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting. I've heard it described the other way, which is it's a music player that also happens to be a phone, which is how Apple was positioning it. And maybe because they were scared about positioning the next generation phone. Right. But, it's true. And it's certainly not, in terms of where music goes on the phone, it is still very much up in the air. And certainly most of the carriers, not just Singular, but all the other carriers are very heavily involved in trying to deliver that next generation of music to the phone.
Yeah, now let's talk a little bit about breaking artists through a mobile device, because one of the problems that has historically happened on mobile has been you have a limited screen, you have limited shelf space, you have a carrier that limits it even further and really has no other interest than to maximize revenue as much as possible, so really all they want to watch out for is that big hit.
Right.
How is now that mobile and music is starting to become ubiquitous with teens, how is it that artists can now actually start to break and develop a following through mobile devices?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what we see, I think your point about distribution, if you think about a record label and distribution, it's very, very hard to break an artist with the carriers, because the carriers are really thinking about where can I capitalize the most amount of revenue from certain artists that I put on the deck. And it's interesting to watch the dynamic between labels and carriers and trying to sort that out. From where I sit, the big emerging opportunity is some of what we heard discussed at the last panel, which talks about how brands, and in my opinion, when it comes to interactive mobile, potentially retailers could play a huge role in bringing a link and connection both for independent artists or for the labels themselves in terms of discovery of music in the real world by youth or others inside stores, being able to act on that information. Text messaging in of itself, I'm sure, we don't of course have this data at Moses so much because we're so focused on music, but if you ran the database of the communication over text messaging, how many times people text their friends directly and talk about new artists, I would say it would move the needle a little bit in terms of volume of messaging. So all of a sudden you've got this ability to communicate out what you've discovered in the world. And so where we sit, we see this opportunity between retail, kids with phones, new music or exciting different things affecting music, and being able to act on that information and spread that information with the mobile phone as being a source of great opportunity for both brands and retailers, as well as